Welcome. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program, and thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Daniel Davis. Just think, from the age of 0 to 5 when we were first born, we learned many things about being alive. For instance, trying to get our reflexes together, being able to taste food, even being able to get up on our feet, and tell people what it is that we want. They say that those first 5 years, maybe even the first 3 years, are some of the most learning experiences that we'll ever have in our entire lives. They pretty much shape who we are. But just also consider that in that 5 years, maybe even that 3 years' time, that one of the most important elements that we learn that most people generally don't even talk about is the idea of relationships and what they are. I mean, think about it, how your mother and father react to each other, how they interact to each other. Were they loving? Was Dad always gone? Was Mom always frustrated because she had to wash dishes and clean the house? Or was she always off to work too? What were they like when they had friends around the house as well? How did they react to other people? What were they like when you were in the grocery store and your mom had to pull off maybe a jar of pickles that dropped and some angry little clerk came along because they had to sweep up and your mom was nasty to them? Or perhaps your dad was very kind when somebody did a very kind act and reciprocated that with very generous tones of, "Thank you very much, I really appreciate that. What can I do for you?" Just think of the many multitudes of ways that we learned about relationships. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is someone we've had many times on our program before, Guy Finley. He's a self-help author of The Essential Laws of Fearless Living, and today is going to talk with us about relationships. And Guy Finley, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today.
Thanks, Daniel. Nice to be with you.
You bet. Now, let's talk about relationships and people and fearless living, why this is so important.
From where do you want to start? I mean,
wherever you'd like to, because this is fearless living.
I mean, we could start it by asking ourselves an important question, and that is, what does a relationship with fear in it do for us? Mm-hmm. I mean, how many of us have people in our lives that are there because we don't know what we would do or be without them? And if that's true, if we have a relationship like that with people, then we have to ask ourselves, well, could it be that this kind of dependency on another human being is actually antithetical to our spiritual life, to our happiness? So fear doesn't belong in human relationships, and it's prevalent in them, which is why there's so much stress in them. We mistakenly look at other people and to other people for our sense of value, of worthwhile. And that's the recipe for fear, Daniel.
I remember many years ago, I think it was back in the 80s, when there was a particular author that was talking about how to make love work. And you may be familiar with the work as well, but I found it interesting as I was listening to or watching an infomercial as I'm thumbing through late-night television. And as this person was conducting their seminar, they said that it's interesting that generally the reason we seem to fall in love with another person is because of how they make us feel. And I guess the contention is that generally we look outside for something that will help fulfill us, and that's generally through another person. Would you consider that to be a fear-based way toward moving toward a relationship?
I do. But the thing is, and it's a great comment, Daniel, that what else can we do when we start out? Look, all of my works, but in particular my new book, The Essential Laws of Fearless Living, are designed, created, if you will, to help the reader begin to understand something about what this life is for. Because the reason it has so much fear and pain in it, disappointment and heartache in our relationships, for instance, is because we really don't understand what these relationships are for. Now, we want to have and need relationships with other human beings, with animals, with plants, with great nature, because it is the way in which we begin, and that's the key word for right now, it is the way in which we begin being introduced to who we are. We want to know other people. We dive into relationships because it is the informal introduction to parts of ourselves that we would never become conscious of were it not for that person acting as a kind of mirror for us for this self-discovery. And that's the attraction, apart from, nature's need through sex to procreate the species. The actual spiritual, the deeper aspect of attraction in relationships is because there is a natural, necessary part of us that is dying to discover the undiscovered territory of itself. And that first ground, if you will, is that when I'm with you, it gives me these feelings. Mm-hmm. But the mistake that I make is that you are creating these feelings in me. You are not creating these feelings in me, because that's where we get into attachment and dependency. Mm-hmm. What you are is stimulating, revealing to me these aspects of my own consciousness. Oh. And that's when we have to start taking the next step and taking responsibility for it. Because as we realize that the reason that I love that horse running through the field, or that child as it plays with that kite, is because it is moving in me an aspect of myself that prior to being stirred by the perception of that person or event, I didn't know was part of who I am. So I hope that's clear, but it's important to make that distinction.
Well, it's actually very clear, Guy, because I remember through the years, and just as many of us have, we've been in loving relationships, friend relationships, and there seems to come an element where there's a falling out, if you will. You're no longer in love, or somebody wants to leave you or break up with you, and you feel like, oh, that person did this to me. They made me feel pain, and all these things they did to me. And the best thing you can actually say to an answer like that is, yes, you're right, they did that to you. But as you were just suggesting, because they are mirrors, it was an aspect of yourself that needed to be addressed or at least experienced.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
And also, though, I would add that, how many times can you listen to Beethoven's Ninth, or, contrasted, Barry Manilow's Mandy? How many times can you listen to a piece of music and still find satisfaction in it if you haven't changed? Meaning at some point, the stimulation, what that music, that vibration is revealing to you, if you haven't enlarged your understanding of yourself so that the notes, if you will, carry more meaning, have more depth, then at some point that music gets old and you're not interested in it anymore. Mm-hmm. This is where relationships die, because one or the other of the partners simply ceases to grow. Mm-hmm. Whereas one wants to continue growing. Or neither grow and then both blame the other for the dullness that is just an expression of their inability to realize new aspects of themselves to further stimulate consciousness into self-discovery. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important that we realize, we are meant to continue growing. I don't care how old we are. We are meant to foray into new parts of ourselves, and when we do see these new things, then we bring it back, so to speak, and want to necessarily share what we've seen. And even if we don't want to share it, by the fact that we have integrated into our lives new understanding, then we simply become a higher reverberation. We become something new that by the very fact of the integration must produce a similar stimulation in the person we're with, and they either reject that because they don't want the new growth, or they are asked to grow into the new relationship that we have provided the means for through our own investigation.
So when we take a look at the aspect of a married couple, for instance, they've been married, it could be 15, 20 years, maybe even 60 years as I've come across those instances. Does it get to a point that perhaps through that length of marriage that they have grown together, that they have reached their ultimate, personal potential of growth? Or what happens when there is a falling out of a marriage, as you suggested earlier, for instance, that one wants to stop growing. They feel they've pretty much grown all they need to and learned, and the other one's saying, wait a minute, I'm still anxious. There's still a lot more to explore in life. They become bored, and so there's a divorce. So it's sort of like, what is the element that seems to be the right element here?
I don't know if we can classify it right and wrong, Daniel.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't think we can. I think we just look at what happens. We realize that some of us, no matter what age we are, have an indefatigable love for discovery, and that's opposed to just pure sensation. I'm not talking about what happens when a man goes through or a woman goes through that midlife crisis, which can occur at 30, 50, or 80, where suddenly they want to re-stimulate themselves according to past patterns, only find new ways to do it. That is not what growth is. Growth is the gradual realization that who and what I am has yet to be discovered, that there's more to this nature of mine than the present set of limitations. For instance, I'm 60, and one part of me says my mind can't learn a new language, but I've always been attracted to Farsi or Arabic or whatever it may be, and I'd love to learn the language so I could read the book in the native word. So one part of us says you can't, another part of us says I really want to, and I want to expand my consciousness. I want to grow. Another person doesn't. Now, there may or may not be a problem in that, but if one's longing to grow runs into the reluctance of another person to support or at least go along with that other individual's wish, then you have a necessary and natural parting of the ways. Because we are not here to simply comply for comfort's sake with the character of another person for fear of what will happen to ourselves or them should we break off. We're here to grow, to discover the truth of ourselves through the infinite possibilities that exist should we be willing to enter into that possibility.
Now, it seems really fascinating, and I really, through even personal experience and just through the observation of what we're talking about here, and for those of you who are just tuning in, we're talking with best-selling author Guy Finley of The Essential Laws of Fearless Living. And we've been talking here about relationships and how they are mirrors and teachers. It's quite interesting, Guy, that as we've been exploring this through the course of the program, that the fact is that as we see or experience, say, a distressful or even a toxic relationship with someone else, or it could be a few people, is that as we move into that and realize that that is there because it's an element within ourselves, as you've suggested, that if we can move into that and come to personal understanding, it seems to me that the fear begins to slowly move away, that you begin to want to welcome that more often. It's like you almost to a sense, you want to see more toxic, if you will, or distressful relationships just because you recognize them as that, and to move into that personally for your own growth and development. Yeah,
Daniel.
And I believe that from like 10 to 15 years ago, I started realizing, there's a lot of truth to that. And the more that I'm in that, instead of pointing the finger and saying, you did this to me and this happened in this relationship,
right,
you really can feel that you become fearless to where you want it more. Now, I guess what I'm trying to make with that point is there have been many times that I would come across people who, for instance, you may see them on a first date and they have been in relationships, maybe even a marriage, and you hear their conversation tend to be, well, this is the way this relationship was, and well, I'm sort of responsible, but then they were this way, and it just wasn't what I was looking for, when in fact it was, because you were with them.
Right.
But then you hear that element of, well, I'm really afraid to commit, or I'm really afraid to do this, and you realize that was where you could have learned all this, where that wouldn't even be part of your conversation.
Yes. Look, it's a great point in a person's path, in their life path, when they begin, as you have indicated, to realize that everything that happens to us, we are made for, no matter what it is. And as we realize that what we formerly resisted or feared seeing about others about ourself and our relationship with them was due to the part of ourself that had actually taken us into that which we fear.
Mm-hmm.
So it's through this kind of beautiful process of revelation that we are released not only from the toxic relationship, but from the parts of ourself that were attracted to it in the first place. And there is no other release. Everything else presents itself as a form of limitation or restriction, because the mind that doesn't discover this part of itself and the punishment it produces will then blame circumstances and try to stay away from conditions, interestingly enough, that it's actually attracted to and will repeat the painful pattern of.
You know, it's funny just to listen to this, because I'm sure to the listeners out there it's so simple to see. So you're trying to tell me somebody that maybe I can't stand. It doesn't even have to be a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a husband, or a wife, or even a best friend, but just someone that if you could walk away from that particular mirror, as you suggested earlier in the program, and say, okay, so what was it in there that just really irritated the hell out of me, or what was it that just really upset me? And sit and you think into that, and you say, okay, so what am I supposed to gain from that? That's a small element or a first step toward really self-realization, is what you've been saying.
Yeah, I have a great little exercise for anyone daring enough or weary enough of repeating the same painful relationships. The little exercise is when you're with somebody and they're setting you off, or you get negative in some way because of what you want to blame them for, you say these words to yourself quietly, inwardly, and then bring your arrow of attention back to yourself. And here are the 7 words. Thank you. I didn't know that about myself. Thank you. I didn't know that about myself. And when we're willing to see that these relationships we have with others are actually intended to reveal to us the parts of ourselves that essentially brought us into that relationship in the first place, then we start going through a marvelous, marvelous process of discovery, Daniel, where we realize, and this is a big lesson, that any form of resistance, whether it's to a person or an event, is actually negative attraction. Resistance is negative attraction.
Mm-hmm.
So that when I don't want to be around you, what I'm really doing is trying to push away, not you, but the feeling of you that my own mind has registered. In other words, to use sort of a semi-scientific approach, you're around somebody and they're reverberating. They're singing out this D-flat note, or D-sharp note. And when, by similarity, that vibration stimulates in me the exact same quality. Mm-hmm. But I look at you and I blame you for the quality you have revealed as being latent in myself. When I blame you and run away from you, I don't change the fact that any circumstance, any person is going to produce the same D-sharp until I actually recognize, you know what, this is a quality in myself. It's not good or bad, but until I, in quotes, claim it, until I become conscious of it, my relationship with this part of myself will be to resist it instead of having realized it and released it. Because, Daniel, it is a great spiritual principle that once we realize a quality or character of ourselves, the realization is the integration of it into the whole of consciousness, and then it is no longer treated as an aberration or an unwanted feature. It's just recognized as being a part of the whole and no longer a part of what punishes us. And we become different, and therefore all of our relationships become different as well.
Now, Guy, I would like to ask this question, and it's interesting because to me it seems that as we kind of go along about the course of our day and we meet people, we talk to people, we get into circumstances that, as you say, they reflect or mirror who we are inside. Otherwise, you wouldn't have that emotional reaction as you were talking about. Let's take a look at this on a larger scale here, because in the upcoming weeks here on the Beyond 50 radio show, we're going to be talking about our current President of the United States. Now, one of the guests who's going to be on our program is going to be talking about his book, The Madness of George W. Bush. And whenever we're in conversation and we talk about our current leader, there generally seems to be a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety and even anger about what has happened over the past 8 years. Now, how do we look at something like that and say to ourselves, okay, what is the lesson and the growth that I personally need to learn from what seems to be a situation that I didn't feel that I had a lot of power or personal control over, but it's still in my face? What do we do then?
Oh, Daniel, we have to learn to understand some things that probably we're not going to be able to cover in the remaining 8 or 9 minutes we've got.
But it was just something that came to mind because it's more of beyond the individual state, but more of a collective state, if you will.
Yeah, look, we're convinced, unfortunately, that the degree to which we suffer over the world outside of ourselves is the proof that we care about the world outside of ourselves.
Very good point.
If we really care about the world outside of ourselves, as evidenced by ecological nightmares, political horrors, and you can't go anywhere. I mean, one prays that there could be a dynamic shift in the political consciousness of the planet.
Mm-hmm.
But I can tell you it's not going to happen. Not because I'm a pessimist, but because real revolution, which is what's required, begins with individuals, not with organizations that express power. Organizations get their power from individuals who have refused to claim their own.
Mm-hmm.
And the real power we have is to refuse to take part in the habitual pattern of going into punishing thoughts and feelings over what other people are doing that we believe are causing us to experience moment to moment what we're experiencing. What we experience moment to moment is our relationship with the content of our own understanding and nothing else. And when we can start to get that, then we realize that if I really care about the country, then I'm not going to get irritated over madness in it. Instead, I'm going to see that my irritation is madness.
Very good. That makes a lot of sense.
See, then I regain the possibility of creative, inventive thinking. I don't waste my energy in frustration, hating groups or people that run counter to my belief about what love is. And I claim in the moment the power that I have to participate in what is taking place around me. And out of that, if I do it properly, Daniel, then I may want to go and help some organization, but I won't do it because I'm trying to escape pain, which is a form of being against something. I will do it because I'm participating consciously in something that I know is good, and it begins with me. And if I really understand that, then I do what is in my power, and I refuse to do what's not.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's true, too, because when we take a look at the attacks on September 11th of 2001, I remember my first feeling was, geez, this was pretty incredible. I felt pretty numb myself.
Sure.
But then my first thought after I could kind of be back in the now, if you will, was somebody must have raised these young men that took the airlines into the buildings and into the Pentagon, and then there was, of course, the crash that was outside of Pennsylvania. But I thought to myself, somebody had to love these people to nurture them to the ages that they were to be able to do these things. So I guess there was an enormous amount of compassion. Now, what I really loved about America and Americans, at least as we were seeing portrayed in the media, is that we were angry, we were upset, we were frustrated, all the normal things that would come in a trauma such to the level of this. But more importantly, the compassion really began to rise, and people wanted to understand, who are these Muslims? What is this country? They wanted to seek to understand these people so they couldn't have the kind of judgment that would put them in a position to say, let's just go get them with baseball bats, axes, and shovels, and let's just go and retaliate.
Yes, Daniel. Look, some of America wanted to understand what the reciprocity was involved in this wretched affair.
Mm-hmm.
How in the world could human beings be bred to such levels of hatred that they would take their own lives to deliver pain to another country?
Right.
But by and large, most of America did not have that and does not have that mindset. We spoke about at the beginning of this talk something that is truly radical. And Christ was the first that we knew of, at least in Judaic-Christian terms, the first radical who said, love thine enemies. How can a human being learn to love those who have done the most despicable thing in the world? Only when they understand what the nature of real love is. Love is not the sentimental, fuzzy, warm feeling that we have when we think about family or hamburgers.
Or Valentine's Day, for that matter.
Or Valentine's Day. Love is the understanding that we are all one being. And as so, share in a life, although completely unseen and by and large not even guessed at, requires us to realize, how if I hate someone, I don't care what they've done. What I am hating is the feeling that I have about them. So in truth, I am hating myself before I can hate, before I can judge another human being. I am judging the image my mind has portrayed of them and then resisting that image, and the pain that is the product of that resistance is what pushes me to try and punish them. So to love my enemy begins with recognizing that I am my enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And not until I see that in some way, Daniel, to some degree, is it possible for me to suspend the habitual knee-jerk reptilian brain reaction that wants to pounce on anything seen as being the source of my suffering.
Mm-hmm.
I am responsible for my suffering, and the truth be known, the suffering in the world we see today wouldn't be nearly in the scope that it is were it not for you and I and everyone else, to whatever degree we participate, trying to, in quotes, get our own, get enough of what we believe we have to have in order to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a broad subject, but just so that we understand, there is a way in which we can learn to live without being part of the system of fear that we are presently, all of us, to one degree or another, producing. And that system of fear is produced by the idea that who and what I am depends upon something outside of myself for its sense of worth and value. Once we realize that who and what we are already has living within it a love that is capable of transcending this mistaken notion of what's making us miserable, then we can begin to live differently, Daniel, and hopefully change ourselves and the world that we live in.
Well, so there it is, folks. For those of you tuning in, we've been talking with Guy Finley, and he is the best-selling author, and one of his books is The Essential Laws of Fearless Living, is that simply throughout the program is that sometimes we see or we get involved in relationships of distress or even toxic relationships, but if we can grab that element within those experiences and realize, okay, what is inside of me that I have this reaction or this action, if you will, move in and understand to that you begin to remove the fear and become more of a fearless person of life. And Guy, it's always a pleasure to have you on the program to talk about this because really, as you see and understand, and I'm sure you have as you work with many thousands of people as well at your retreats and seminars, is that people kind of take a look at this and they'll stretch, and they really try to stretch their imaginations. For instance, when we talk about, for instance, a toxic relationship, it could be somebody who perhaps maybe took the life of one of your loved ones, maybe your children. You say, well, then how do I come to terms with that? Well, that's the gripping question of the day, is to understand and to go into yourself to try to seek that fear that's within yourself in that situation and learn to overcome that so that you can become fearless to the point that you're not continuously paranoid that this may happen again.
Yeah, that's another point well taken. And if we had time, I could even explain how we can learn to forgive such heinous acts as that. But to understand that, and it's not this isn't my teaching. I'm merely an instrument of these ideas. Perfect love casts out fear. Perfect love casts out fear. And anything that causes us fear, and any of the negative byproducts of fear, such as hatred and resentment, are really secret ways in which we're invited to discover that these dark states are really not adversarial, but invitational, trying to invoke in us a realization that what we've been presented with is an opportunity to dive deeper into an order of ourselves in which this love that exists and gave life to us can present to us completely new ways to see these kind of problems. So, I know we've run out of time. Can I give a website quickly, Daniel?
Absolutely, please.
Look, The Essential Laws of Fearless Living is my brand new book, but if you go to guyfinley.org, Finley, guyfinley.org, right there on the home page, there's a host of free gifts. And if you're interested in the book, my foundation is offering 5 free gifts with it, including a DVD and some free MP3s. But you can just get a lot of good information free at guyfinley.org.
Well, very good. Again, Guy Finley, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today, and adding to that element that there is no reason for any of us to live in fear, because we want that roller coaster ride as we take that one marvelous, miraculous shot at just simply being alive. And it's been a pleasure to have you on our program today.
Daniel, you too, and I'll look forward to speaking with you again. It's always a pleasure.
Okay, you betcha. Well, I also thank you, the listeners out there, and we'd also like to thank our new sponsor, HemiSync. And just to give you an idea of who these folks are, with over 50 years of research and development, supported by numerous independent studies, reports, and articles, the patented HemiSync technology has been scientifically and clinically proven to be effective. What do you say is it effective with? Well, would you like to tap into more of your brain's innate abilities, enter meditative states reliably and easily, reduce stress, be more creative and productive, concentrate and focus your attention when needed? Boy, I can certainly use that from time to time. Experience deep restorative sleep and refreshing cat naps. Boy, nothing like a good cat nap in the middle of the day, especially after a good meal. Or would you like to uncover your intuitive talents, basically center with who you are? Well, if you'd like to find out more about this, or perhaps purchase the audio CDs, and I'm telling you, folks, these are really, really interesting things here, just visit the Monroe Products website at www.hemi-sync, that's SYNC.com, so that's HEMI-SYNC.com, or just simply call 1-800-541-2488, that's 1-800-541-2488. to learn how this exceptional technology can help you achieve your greatest potential. I would like to thank Guy Finley for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today, and for those of you tuning in, please visit our website at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50 with the 50. Also sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter, where you'll also find out more about our blog and our past shows. Pretty much it's a multimedia site as well. And I want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in today. I'm Daniel Davis, and remember, live your day past halfway.